Well, we'll give it just a minute for everybody else to file in, or I never know what to say when it's a digital talk. Like if people just show up, do they file in? What do we say? How's everybody doing tonight? Good to see everybody. I think it's what is it? It's about 7:20 p.m. here, just outside of New York City for me. Good to see everybody. I think I've got the chat up in front of me. So as we sort of go through the talk, let me know where you're from, sort of anything you want to hear about as I'm going through the talk, doing all that sort of stuff. Thanks for showing up. Thanks for being a fan. All that good stuff. A lot of people always joke whenever they see me do one of these talks, it's sort of like a live podcast. So we'll just sort of roll with that spirit. And whenever I do the show anyway, I just sort of pretend people are listening. So this will sort of be something similar. We're here today to talk about imposter syndrome. And, I picked this subject because I think for a couple different reasons. One, I get asked about it a ton. I think two, lately, I'm seeing a lot of people that are definitely feeling it, suffering from it, not sure what to do about it. Even for me, I got laid off 5 months ago. And anytime you search for a new job, it is pure imposter syndrome fuel. Man, is that like a difficult search. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump into my deck here in a minute, and sort of talk through what this is, right? Like, why does it affect leaders? Why does it affect designers? What are the couple different types of imposter syndrome that there actually are? So you can get a better understanding of what that is. And then we're going to talk about what are some of the things you can do. And then I'm going to make sure I leave some time for Q&A at the end. So like I said, I got the chat up. So anything you want to know more about or anything like that, feel free to throw it in there as we go. Always give it just a second. There we go. So for those of you who don't know me, hi, my name's Steve Gates. It's always a little weird having a headshot whenever you're actually here, it live and in person. So, like I said before, so a lot of people know me from my podcast, The Crazy One. This is something I've been doing for just about a little north of 6 years. I got about 125 episodes out there, and it deals with a lot of what we're talking about today. I try to talk about a lot of the subjects that I think we don't talk about enough, whether that's around design, leadership, creativity, issues like imposter syndrome, politics at work, gender bias, like tons and tons of different things about that. So again, I think that's where a lot of people know me from. And so I think, it's been interesting. Like I said, the last 5 months for me have been an absolute journey into my own imposter syndrome, because anytime you get laid off, anytime you have to do freelance work, anytime you are interviewing, anytime you do anything creative, it's a whole bunch of imposter syndrome. And so this is the first time I'm going to say it out loud. But so a lot of it for me is I've actually gotten to a place of honestly like choosing not to engage in a lot of that structure anymore. So this is the soft launch, but in a couple weeks, I'm going to announce that I'm actually not going back to an in-house team. I've decided I'm going to start my own firm, my own agency, really doing consulting, doing design, and doing work like this. So doing inspirational work, doing career coaching, doing leadership coaching, doing keynotes, because I feel like there's a really good niche for it. And I'll be honest, I am happier than I have been in a really long time doing this sort of work. So there'll be more about this that I'm going to sort of share publicly, but I just wanted to it felt like I've been with ADP List since this was a Google sheet super early on. So it was a good community to be able to share and sort of say, look, this is more of what I want to do, because I want to help more people and help more companies with sort of what I'm able to bring with my experience. But let's start with this statement, right? I think that for a lot of people, they don't necessarily realize that I think for creatives in general, but especially for leaders in particular, if you need to lead your team, if you are the only designer inside your company, if you need to be the one who shows up and talks about designing creativity, you probably suffer from imposter syndrome more than anybody. And I think that the problem is that nobody, and I mean nobody, talks about that, right? Like nobody goes on social media, almost nobody, and says, look, I've really got a problem. I feel like I'm really screwing this up. And this is the thing. I think this is one of the biggest, most unspoken problems, is that leadership is really affected by imposter syndrome, at least as much, if not more than anybody else. And so, like, why is that? And as I look at my own career, I've noticed a bunch of other things have really started to happen. I work for an organization and a boss that usually wants results, right? They want me to be able to elevate design. They want me to be able to get business results. I'm now in charge of a team. And one of the unspoken rules of leadership is that generally you don't get the luxury of a bad day. Whenever something happens, like last week, right? All of a sudden, Figma sells to Adobe. Your team needs answers. What are we doing? Like, what is happening to our tools, right? What are we going to do? They need a plan. You need to be able to show up, and you don't just sort of get to be one of those sort of things where it's like, I'm going to stay in bed today. So I think your team wants leadership. That, in a lot of cases, I see for a lot of leaders and a lot of creatives, especially through the pandemic, our support system has gotten really weak because we work from home or we work remote, or if you're a leader, you have that big job, right? So you're not going out and really doing one of those things about sort of like trying to maintain your network the way that you used to. And so I think that in a lot of cases, you're also doing things that aren't your core skill set or passion. Because for me, I know that things like budgets or budget planning or road mapping or doing reviews or I'm pretty sure I went to art school to get away from all that stuff because I didn't want to have to do work in Excel or to do a lot of those sort of things. And so I think that this is a lot of, I'm being asked to do things that aren't my core skill set. And I can see in the comments, this may be resonating with a few people. But that's the thing is like, so I have this combination of like my boss wants results, my team needs answers. I don't have the support system that I used to. I'm doing a lot of things that aren't my core skill set. I have to be like in my career, I have to be deliberate around finding time to still be a designer. That's the cruel irony that sort of nobody tells you in this industry is that the longer you stay in it, the further it's going to take you away from what you love. They sort of leave that out of like design 101 that a lot of times that's what leadership is going to entail. It doesn't have to. And we can have a whole nother conversation around what leadership could look like. But I think that, look, you really start to feel like your style of leadership, a lot of cases, maybe it doesn't match what your team expects. Maybe it doesn't match what your boss expects. Maybe you feel like I don't have all the answers that I feel like I should. I think a lot of this has been heightened. I think imposter syndrome has sort of found a whole new foothold in remote work, because one of the biggest things that remote work did is it robbed us of context, right? I used to be able to see other leaders at conferences. I could see other designers in my office. I could be able to sort of benchmark, where am I? Because I could say, I could look over somebody's shoulder and see their Figma file and go, I'm better than them. Maybe I'm not as good as them, right? You could learn a lot of those things. And I think remote has taken a lot of this away. And I think this is the first thing that we need to acknowledge is that leaders, creatives, everybody suffers from imposter syndrome. And it's even a little bit more complicated than that because it's going to change and evolve as you evolve, right? Because who you are today is not who you're going to be in 6 months, 1 year, 2 years, 5 years, 10 years. Your experience is going to change. Your goals are going to change. Your creative process is going to change. So what you feel secure and insecure about will change as you go through that time. So one of the things I want to do is just, I think if this is going to be something that we're all affected by, we need to understand what are we dealing with? Because I think the best teams that I've been a part of, the best teams that I've worked with, not only understand what these types are, but it is an active part of their culture where they can talk about it, they can map it, they can support it. And so, because look, the basic definition of imposter syndrome is, if you look it up in Wikipedia or Webster's dictionary, this is, again, that as functionally the persistent inability to believe in your own success, or if you found success, that it's actually been deserved. And that, even if you have achieved it, even if there's a lot of evidence to the contrary, I was joking backstage, like every time I still go on stage or do a talk, it's like, well, I hope I don't face plant this time. I've done talks hundreds of times, but that little voice is still in my head. And so I think that's always there. And I think that a lot of the times where we have trouble figuring out imposter syndrome is a lot of the characteristics of it, whenever they're kept in balance, a lot of the characteristics, whenever they're kept in proportion and perspective, are actually the things that make us really good. It's the drive, it's the focus, it's the attention to detail. It's a lot of these things that actually are the things that will make us successful. It's whenever those voices get too loud. It's whenever that, voice jumps up and grabs the megaphone and is like, "Hey, you don't know what it is you're doing." And it stops us from doing things. It stops us from saying things. It stops us from progressing. That's where it really is, right? And I think that's a lot of, and looking at Lucia, what you had in the chat, right? For me, it's the difference between failure and learning, right? Like failure and learning is a mindset or how you see it. I think if you see it as learning, like it's for me, you never, as long as you learn something, you never fail. It's whenever you let it defeat you, stop you, destroy something, then that's whenever it gets into failure. But there are 5 basic types of imposters. And I hate to break it to you, everybody is one of these. And then more than likely, you're more than one of them. I usually have a dominant one or 1 or 2 secondary ones. The first one is the perfectionist. And this is just what it sounds like. These are people who set crazy high goals, right? They want to do something perfectly. They want to do something really, really well. And the problem is that whenever they don't reach it, then it's like, well, I didn't do it perfectly. Maybe I'm not good enough. Maybe I'm not smart enough. Maybe I'm not the person I think I am. And I think that, with a lot of this stuff, with perfectionists, a lot of what it happens for them is that success is rarely satisfying. Because whenever you look at the work, whenever you look at whatever you've created, all you see is what could have been better. You see the mistakes, you see the derailments, you see what had to get pushed to a .1 release or a 2 release or something like that. And that a lot of perfectionists, their biggest problem is a lot of their happiness is very target based. Meaning, if I do this, if I accomplish this, then I will be happy. It's a very difficult mindset to be in, because whenever you accomplish that, you're going to enjoy it for 24 hours, 48 hours. Your brain recalibrates, sets a new target. You go back down the hill and you're working again, trying to be able to achieve that new goal. And I think a lot of what you need to be able to learn to do, if this is something that sounds like you, is really look at how do you own and celebrate those achievements. Because if you don't, you're going to burn out. You're not going to be content. You're like, again, a lot of self-confidence feels like, oh, if I do what I know and I do it perfectly, then I'm going to get more confident. That's not the case. And so again, I think taking the time to actually recognize what you did and the positive of it, I think even I've completely rethought. So this is my secondary one that I suffer from. I've even completely reset my goals, because a lot of my personal goals and what I wanted to do used to be very focused on what I wasn't, what I didn't know, what I hadn't accomplished, right? It was a lot of setting it from a deficit perspective, as opposed to really saying, look, I'm really good at this. How do I build on it? Right? Really sort of changing my mindset made a really big difference, right? And I think I've already seen a bunch of people really start to identify with what this is. The next one, and this is my number one, so this is my primary imposter syndrome that I struggle with, is called the Superwoman or the Superman. And what this is that you are convinced that you're a phony, that you're somebody who isn't very good at what you do, and you're working alongside people who are the real deal. So what you do is you often will push yourself really, really hard to work harder and harder, longer, show up earlier, stay later, to be able to measure up. These are people who used to be super easy to spot when we all worked in person, because these are the people who would show up at 8 o'clock and leave at 6. Even if their work was done at 4, they're there till 6, because you really feel like your value is tied to your level of effort. This is something I've spent years trying to overcome, because for me, having a full-time job and doing the podcast and doing talks and doing like giving back to the community and mentoring on ADP, these were all things that really, really like were a big driver behind that for me. And Venus, look, I'm right there with you. I think, for me, this definitely kicks in every time I get one. It's just impressive if you actually get a rejection anymore. So like, that's even nice if they spend enough time to do that. But I think that's the problem, right? Like every time I'd get a rejection, I'd go back, redo my resume, redo my book, look at my case studies, right? Like it's that constant, my value is derived in my amount and depth of work. And so this is the thing, right? Is that we're addicted to the validation that comes from working, not from the work. And I think that's often just because for us, it's never good enough. It can always be better, right? Like it's a little bit of, sort of a derivative or a cousin of perfectionism. But again, it's often the process and the working, and we don't feel like we have value if we're not working. And so a lot of this is really starting to look at how do we create things that we like, that we think have value? Because a lot of what it is we're doing is we're looking to external validation for them to validate us. A lot of the people who suffer from Superwoman and Superman, usually also one of the stumbles they have in their career is that they tend to move through their career really seeing what the industry will give them or what they think their company wants them to be. Rarely do they look at what is it that they want to be, or really do they look at what do they want. And it can be a mild perspective shift, but it's something that really, really makes a big difference around, because for a lot of those people, like I'll get leaders who come to me for coaching and I'll say, well, why are you frustrated? Why are you burned out? It's like, well, I took this new job and it's all right. Or I took this promotion. It's like, well, why'd you do that? It's like, well, it was more money. It's like, well, do you like the work? It's like, well, I didn't really think about the work. It's more money. Or it was the next step in the career ladder there. Or it's a lot of like, well, that was the next thing that they would give me. And it's a small thing, but it makes a big difference. And so again, I can already tell from like show of hands around this how many um, people do that. Now, the third one is something called the natural genius. And natural geniuses, these are often the kids who were really good at school. They were the gold star students. They were the best in their class. These are the ones who were always told that they were the best or really good at what they did. And so natural geniuses really will judge themselves by functionally how hard is it for them to do something. Really meaning if I can't do something quickly, if I can't do something well, and if it takes me any amount of time to master something, then I must be bad at it. I don't measure up. I'm insufficient, right? Like it's not, I need to be able to be smarter and do these sort of things. And I think that this is, if you have one of these, I think this is something that is sort of, instead of beating yourself up whenever it's not easy, really look at, because I think in general, there's that like, well, look, this wasn't easy. This wasn't fast. I don't know what to do. Like I'm getting frustrated. Natural geniuses usually do not like mentoring. They usually, because again, they feel like they should be able to figure it out. And so I think that a lot of what this is to really lean in and to look at how do you find a mentor. Whenever you do, work with them on setting specific, small, changeable behaviors that you can improve over time, right? Like this is something where you need to coach your mentor that you have a natural genius imposter syndrome, because they may come in and try to change large things all at once. That's not going to work. You're going to get frustrated. So I think it really is something about how you even work with mentorship to think about making it smaller, specific, changeable, accountable. These are all really good things to be able to do. Now, the next one for this, the fourth one, is something that's called the individualist. And the individualist is that this is somebody who's a natural genius really looks at how easily can I do it. An individualist, as the name would imply, these are things where really you want to do it on your own. And especially this is something that creatives are susceptible for. Every single person who has ever started in leadership, the individualist was probably your dominant imposter right whenever you started, because this is the whole part of like, why are you putting that color there? Why did you use that button? Why did you use that typeface? If you would just move, I could do this faster, right? Like I could be able to figure this out. I could have done that design in an hour. Why did it take you 2 days, right? And I think this is a lot of it, is that for individualists, it really is something where you just want to do it on your own. And again, these are also people, they don't like mentorship. In a lot of cases, they don't. I think a lot of times individualists are mistaken for introverts, and sometimes they can be a little bit mislabeled that way, where, because for a lot of times they like to work alone, and that they feel like if they're asking for help, it reveals their imposter, right? Like they never use the word I, they always use we. Whenever they ask about a project, it's never for what they want or what they need. It's what the team needs, what the project needs, what the company needs, right? Like it's always very elevated. They never look out for their own individual goals and what it is that they need. And I think that this is often something where, again, individualists were hit extremely hard whenever it came to remote work, because in a lot of cases, they would turn on their camera for 30 or 60 minutes. They would put on a performance, act like everything is great. And then all of a sudden, they would be able to get into this. And it's like, well, I'm not doing really well. I feel very isolated. And I think that here again, this is something where getting a support system, getting mentoring, getting a career coach, getting somebody you can talk to help you is a huge help in really taking this on. And then the last one we want to talk about is the expert. And now the expert is somebody, and again, I think that a lot of people, especially early on in their career, a lot of young designers will often suffer from this. And the expert is somebody who honestly believes, and it's a little contrary to what the name sounds like, but functionally you believe you're never going to know enough, right? These are people who are constantly, they're doing trainings, they're doing YouTube, they're looking at the latest software releases, they're learning new platforms, they're doing, because a lot of it for them is that they feel like having the answers, they feel like having knowledge, having an understanding of what's going on, being the one who always has the answer, who's in the know, being the one who read the latest article, who can send that out for the team, right? Like that is going to make you feel more valued. And that if you ever don't know the answer, then that's going to be something where you feel inexperienced, you feel unknowledgeable. A lot of the challenge with an expert is really how do you become comfortable being uncomfortable? And that it's something where, what you often want to do with this really is looking at, look, we all need to evolve. We need to learn. We need to be able to know what's going on, but it's when you do it. And I think in a lot of cases, if you can just start to look at how do you shift what you're doing to more just in time learning, meaning whenever you see you need to know something, that it is something to learn it then. Because for too many of us, I think, again, this is a little bit of that Superman, Superwoman of we feel like if we're learning and if we're doing, we're creating value for ourselves. If kept in balance, you're right, that's good. But if it goes too far, if you're doing it constantly, if it's driving an insecurity, if it's driving a lot of that, this particular is also really damaging because one of the biggest things that I will continue to talk about in your career is that your value is based in your creativity and your thinking. That if all you can do is know applications, if all you can do is design really well, there's a ceiling to that part of your career, right? Like companies, every company in the world will value creativity. I'll argue almost no company will really value design, right? Do they appreciate it? Yes, but at the end of the day, they think it's a commodity. So that's why the higher paying jobs, the longer careers, the bigger things go to people that are on more the creative side. And so I think that's why sort of getting trapped in that expert can actually be career limiting and something that you really want to work on. But like I said, remote has put a totally different spin on this. So those are the 5 basics. But I think remote work has layered on something that we all need to be aware of because it's really taken this in a different direction, and added some more complications to it. One is just, and I've referenced this a few times, right? We have to acknowledge that in many cases there is physical and social isolation, that we're being robbed of the social cues, the casual feedback, the conversations that would happen in the hallway, right? And that for a lot of creatives, whenever those sort of things are taken away, that usually creates doubt, it creates insecurity, and ultimately it really does create a sense of isolation. So yeah, Bianca, like there are actually multiple episodes that I've done on this. So if you want, there are deeper dives on all of this. There's one just on the remote work piece. If you feel like you don't want to scribble notes, there's more detailed versions of the show that you can get into. But this is it, right? Like for a lot of us, like I said, it robbed us of our context and those social cues. And that for so many of us, that concern turned into doubt, the doubt turned into insecurity, the insecurity turned into imposter syndrome. And that, again, the more you can participate in things like this, be a part of a community. This is why it was such a big part of what this is. Hallie, the podcast is called The Crazy One. Like I said, there's about 125 episodes. Every episode is labeled by subject matter, so it's pretty easy to find. You can also find it. Just go to thecrazy1.com. All the shows are there. I think it's also very easy in remote work to misread tone, right? Like this has been a long-standing thing of don't read tone into emails or Slacks or things like that because it's very difficult to be able to really understand. And in many cases, you tend to read it in the negative. This is something that's called negativity bias. Again, great show on cognitive bias. If you don't understand what that is, another one good that's really good to listen to. I think another thing that we have to acknowledge is The other thing that remote work did was whenever we went from being in person to being remote, one of the biggest things that happened for a lot of teams, for a lot of companies, is it sort of surfaced all your organizational sin. So if you had bad process, bad tooling, bad infrastructure, if you had more managers than leaders, all of that became painfully apparent because all of a sudden you could really see what was going on and you could really understand that, you know what, maybe I'm working for a company that doesn't know what they're doing. Maybe my boss is more of a manager to be able to do that. And that's a real challenge. But here is our biggest challenge. And I think so. I do 3 ADP sessions a week. Every once in a while, I do what I call a Super Tuesday, where I do 8 hours, so 16 sessions in a day. One of the biggest things that I see time and time again, and I think that if you take nothing out of this session but this, it is the recognition that as creatives, we do something really bad, which is that in a lot of cases, we compare our insides to everybody else's outsides. This is, we're comparing ourselves to what do we see people saying on social media. We compare ourselves to job descriptions. We compare ourselves to all these other things. And there are always comparisons where we come up short, right? Nothing will ever drive more imposter syndrome than a freaking job description. I mean, I've made fun of ones repeatedly on LinkedIn. Well, they'll ask for like 5 or 6 years experience in Figma when the platform had only been around for 3 or 4, right? And it's this comparison where we're not being honest about what's going on in social media, where we're not being honest, right? Where we're propagating, like, I still feel so bad for new designers because apparently there are no jobs for 0 to 3 years experience. Like, you're supposed to start in the industry at 3 years and go from there. And it's just the dumbest thing I've ever seen. And I think that this is what a lot of us are doing, right? We're comparing our insides to everybody else's outsides. So a couple thoughts about what to do with it. And I think this is things that in my coaching sessions and other things that I recommend. I think one is to over communicate, right? I think whenever you talk about this, whenever you find people to talk about with it, it helps calm your fears, your self-doubts. It really, I will continue to argue that I think vulnerability is the new leadership currency. It's the new currency of creativity. I think being deliberate around that, finding a mentor, doing these sort of things, because look, I'll continue to argue that, and I think this has been a reminder for me over the last 5 months, you don't know how much support you have until you tell somebody you need it. And I think to be able to do that is something that is a really, really important skill. I think the next one for me is to share what you are going through. I have been extremely public around the fact that I got laid off, what the job search has been, how difficult it has been. And I think a lot of what that is to create that sort of transparency and genuine accountability really helps because you feel like you're not alone. And I think one of the other things a lot of people don't think about is whenever you're able to talk about this, is that it is a real reflection on your brand. How do you show up? The fact that, like, getting laid off from a company is their failure, not yours. And I think too many people feel like it's a scarlet letter. It's something you should be ashamed of. Screw that, right? Getting laid off means that leadership at a company screwed up the company performance so badly that they had, or they mismanaged their money so badly they had to let people go. That is not an indication of your performance. And I have seen so many people over the last few months who have almost taken bad jobs, who have also almost gone into things they didn't want because they just would not put the green ring on LinkedIn that said I'm open to work or I got laid off or whatever that is, right? If you are somebody that is struggling with that, email me tonight, message me on LinkedIn tonight. I will put your profile. I've got whatever it is, 20 or 30,000 followers on LinkedIn. I will help promote you to be able to get you the job that you want. I'll make whatever introductions you want. Any of these sort of things, right? I think if you need help with this, you reach out to me, I will help you. But I think you need to share your journey. But a lot of it is also create your support system. Don't let this just be the time you engage with this community, right? Don't wait for a crisis or happenstance to talk to people. Be deliberate around how do you create that support system. Find people that you can meet with on a regular basis, right? Like for me, once a month, I have an invitation, and it's some of the smartest people I know, some of my favorite creatives, people that I've worked with, whatever that is. It's an invitation to about 60 people. Whoever shows up, right? But this is my support system. This is all of our support system, and we are deliberate about investing in it every single month, and it makes a really big difference. But a lot of it is, and we've talked about this, right? It's empowering vulnerability, that you're going to need to be aware of being able to, how do you support each other? How do you get positive feedback? How, like, what, basically, who is your board of directors, right? Who are the people that are there for you? And I think like you tend to need different ones. Like get somebody who's just your hype person. They're just there to make you feel good. Get somebody who is your truth teller, right? Like somebody who's really going to tell you the truth no matter what goes on, right? Get somebody who will help you with what you struggle with. If you're not good at systems thinking or operations or doing those sort of things, find somebody who can help you with that, right? Make your board of directors and be deliberate around that level of vulnerability and opening up to them. But I think the last thing to me is like, look, believe in yourself. And every time your imposter syndrome pops up, take a screenshot of this. This makes me laugh constantly. This is something that I think, like, if you ever want to say, I'm not sure my idea is good enough, if you ever want to say, I'm not sure what I'm thinking of is a good idea, I constantly think of this sign, right? So the next time you're afraid to share your idea, remember somebody once said in a meeting, let's make a film with a tornado full of sharks, right? And that somebody made it. Like in a weird way, I still want to meet whoever the person was that made like the poop emoji, right? Like whoever looked at that system and said, you know what we're missing? And pitched the poop emoji and got it sold is my freaking hero, right? Because that is the epitome of getting over your imposter syndrome and saying that's what we need to do. But this is it, right? Is that for so many of us, it's remembering too that, and I have to remind myself of this, success is a concept that only exists in hindsight. Whenever you're going through something, whenever you're struggling something, whenever you're doing that sort of thing, then that's going to be the challenge, is to be able to say, okay, how do we overcome this? What do I do? Whenever I've done something that doesn't work, then it's like, well, I'm not quite sure what to do. But after it worked, then all of a sudden everybody knew it all along. So hold on, I'll give you a second. And okay, that's my personal email address. So that'll get you to be able to connect with me directly on LinkedIn or send me an email directly. But that's the thing. So that'll get you. So I say you can follow, but there's the email address. So congratulations, you showed up to this session. That's the golden ticket. But that's it, right? And so I think, from there, look, you can. I'm on every social media platform. Like I said, I've got the podcast. I've got tons of other stuff. Now you've got my email address, so you can reach out to that. So I'm going to stop sharing there. And why don't we get into some of the Q&A around all this?
Yes, thank you so much, Stephen. We'll move on to Q&A. And the first question I'd like to show on stage is from Bianca. She's asking that I think my challenge is that I'm good at a bunch of things, but not great at any of them. So I feel like an imposter at everything. Any tips on how to work with strengths as opposed to getting hung up on weaknesses, on imperfections?
Well, yeah, and I think it's a really good question, because I think, like, I'm not the best at anything. I don't think I'm terribly creative. I think I'm a decent speaker, right? Like, there's a lot of that stuff. I think we're all susceptible to like what is great. One of the exercises, whenever I have a lot of people who come to me for mentoring and coaching, one of the things that I often will ask them to do to say, look, what am I good at? Because we're all of our own biggest blind spot, right? It's always hard to be able to know what are we good at. And if you do feel like you're good at something, when you say it out loud, it just feels egotistical, or it just doesn't feel honest. And I think, one of the best things that I'm going to be able to do with a lot of people has been go out to your coworkers, to people on your team, significant others, parents, whatever that is, right? And ask them, what am I really good at? Three things, 3 words, 3 separate words. Because I think in a lot of cases, that's what you want to be able to focus on, right? Focus on your impact. Focus on how other people see you. Get that sort of perspective to understand what are you good at? Because in many cases, the reason why I do that is I think whenever you're able to get that external perspective, in a lot of cases, it helps you start to believe that you are good at that, right? Because I'm not going to be so naive as just sitting here and just being like, oh, well, just believe you're good in things, right? Like that. It's like going to a comedian saying, be funny, right? Like that doesn't work. But I think if there are ways that you're able to be able to get some of that feedback, be able to get some of that support, be able to get that perspective, then often cases what happens is it gives you permission to believe in yourself. Because I think that often is, especially in corporate culture, especially in this day and age, believing in yourself, showing up as your authentic self, caring for your happiness, caring for your mental health, right? These are all things that are extremely difficult. if not borderlining on just acts of bravery or almost defiance to be able to do it. So that's the exercise I would tell you to do, is start with that. Just ask a bunch of people, and then it'll be like a design sprint. You're going to get these 3 words back from everybody else, throw them in a mural or a Miro or something like that. You're going to start to see kind of like the heat map come together. And that way, that's really going to give you that confidence to start to really look at sort of like, where do I feel like I'm really good at those sort of things? And then it is really looking at, how do you start to practice believing in yourself? How do you start to practice seeing and being deliberate around saying, okay, what did I do well in equal parts of what could be better?
Awesome. Thank you so much. We'll move on to the next question, which is from Kip. How do I navigate the expectations that others have of you without losing sight of yourself? It gets hard to keep pushing what you want sometimes.
I mean, look, Kip, I'll tell you what. I have tattoos on both forearms dealing with my mental health journey around what this is. So the crazy one is born out of the fact I have a tattoo on my right arm that says, "Here's the crazy one." It's not an Apple fanboy tattoo or anything, since I worked with them. It's a reminder to me to show up as my authentic self every single day. Because look, we have to acknowledge that every single day there is pressure for who do you think you should be? Who do you think the industry wants you to be? Who do you think your company wants you to be? Who do you think your boss wants you to be? Who do you think your coworkers want you to be? And where we get into trouble is when the gap between who we think we should be and who we are gets too big. Because I definitely got to a place where I was showing up as who I thought everybody wanted me to be. And the funny part was, whenever I stopped listening to all that, whenever I showed up as myself, whenever I believed in what that was, it's amazing how my career exploded. But you're right? Like, this is not an easy thing to do. And the reason why is because at most companies, what they value is they value compliance and they value the status quo, meaning you're supposed to act a certain way, think a certain way, go along with a certain line of thinking, and just sort of like go with what everybody else does. Whenever you show up as your authentic self, that is then you taking a stand or being different, or it's something people can judge you on. And this is, for me, this is literally why my show is called The Crazy One, because I think that you almost have to be crazy to see that what you think is different, what too many of us have been led to believe makes us lesser or weaker or different, that if we look at that the right way, that's our superpower. That's what makes us so creative. That's what makes us something that stands out from everybody else, right? Like, history does not remember well-behaved people. History does not remember people who act like everybody else. Think about your favorite artist, your favorite musician, your favorite, like any of these sort of things. These are not people that did things by being like everybody else. And if all your company values is your compliance and being like everybody else, get the hell out of that company, because you are never going to be able to grow and succeed the way that you want there. And I think that that's the biggest thing for me, is that who you are, the value you bring, how you are different, that is the thing that makes you great. That is the thing that makes you exceptional. That is the thing, as a creative, that is going to make you so much better in all those sort of ways, right? But it is standing in the face of that, again, like I said, is an almost defiant act of saying, this is who I am, and I believe in that, and I believe that my opinion has value, especially in the face of, this is why creativity and corporate culture mostly doesn't like to coexist, because they want you to believe that, again, those differences are weaknesses. And I have dedicated my life and career to absolutely fighting that way of doing it. So I'll climb down off my soapbox, but like, look, that's really, to me, one of, I think, the biggest, most harmful, most damaging things in this industry is how many people have generic resumes, have generic sites, have generic jobs, have generic work and generic existences, because they don't feel like they can be themselves. And it is so exhausting and draining.
Wonderful. I think in the interest of time, I just want to show one last question, and because it is a very real question. Any tips on reconnecting with a network that has gone cold over the past few years? I'm nervous to reach out to people again because everyone is burned out these days.
So this is what I would say, right? I think, Bianca, a lot of people are there, right? I think everybody is in this. The Great Resignation happened for a reason. I think there's a couple things to do, right? Like, one, don't ever underestimate the power of a virtual lunch, virtual drinks, just saying, I'd love to catch up. What are you doing, right? Like, just reaching out and doing something personal without, like, hey, tell me about your job. I mean, look, there's also the ability to leverage the ADP community, leverage LinkedIn, leverage other places and saying, look, I'm going through this. Is anybody else going through this? And I think, I've done shows that I thought would end my career, only to discover that, like, whenever I said it out loud, it's amazing how many people suddenly are like, oh my God, I've been feeling the same way. I just didn't want to say that. And so I think, the ability to, I think that the only superpower I have is just my ability to, like, let it fly, right? Reach out to those people, right? Because what the worst that's going to happen is you're not going to hear back. The best that's going to happen is you're going to start to get that community. You're going to start to get that board of directors. You're going to start to get those people that you need as your support system. And then if it's not those, go find new ones or be able to sort of do what that is. I think so much of it for me, right, is that overcoming imposter syndrome really is about, for me, and it comes back to, like, success is a choice. And do you let the voice win, right? Do you let the doubt win? Or do you just say, look, I'm going to try it and see what happens? And so, look, I mean, I would, like, Bianca, I'll tell you what, like, email 2 or 3 of them tonight, right? Ask them and say, hey, can we get a virtual drink? Go out to lunch. I miss you. I want to talk to you. Whatever that is. See how many of them write you back. I think you'll probably be shocked with the results because I think when you reach out in that genuine human way, it's amazing the energy you get back.
Great. Thank you so much, Steven, for the wonderful session. I hate to cut it short, but we are short of time. Great. Thank you so much, everybody, for tuning in to Steven's talk as well. We still have a lot of sessions going on for Be More, so I will see you. I will see you at Be More sessions. Great. Thank you, and have a wonderful